are here with our January artist, Tracy Ingham. I'm so excited to talk to you today and learn more about your art. I have burning questions.
Ask away.
We've got a little bit of his work behind us. We have quite a large show that will be going up. His show will be on exhibit here in our main gallery, January 7th through the 30th.
Okay.
So my first question, I was reading your bio and you were explaining that during COVID, you were having a really hard time finding inspiration. And, you know, we were all isolated and you probably got a lot of inspiration from being out in the world. And this collection that will be on view is all a Western aesthetic.
Yes.
So I read that you started watching Westerns.
So I had a friend who worked on 1883, the show. And so that I'd known through social media. And she's the one that turned me on to 1883. And so I started watching it, and the cinematography was so amazing that I think I've sat through every episode like 5 or 6 times. And I just started with my sketch pad. And so I started drawing and drawing and drawing. And that's how the Western kind of crept its way in. And I started to switch to acrylics because I really wanted faster. I had all these ideas in my head, and it's like oils are not working for me right now. And so I went and got all my palette knives and big selection of acrylics and just started in with them. Most of it was done from 21 through 23. Because I had spent the better part of 2020 kind of sort of going, I've run out of ideas, I'm not inspired, and complaining, you know, couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything, everything was closed. So yeah, that was my outlet, was, you know, realizing that I've always done horses. And my grandfather was a big part of the Western community. And so
I assumed that you probably had some prior connection with it, because one thing I've noticed looking at, and you'll see this in this exhibition, is they're super realistic. They almost look like photographs, and your attention to detail, like from a leather strap or a piece of like dusty worn fabric, or the suede of a hat or a rope. How much research do you do in preparation? Do you do research on, you know, what kind of, and you look at those different textures, because it's so important, particularly with this genre. So what kind of research do you do in preparation for?
I actually have my grandfather's old felt hat yet. But my research into paintings started when I was doing the World War II military a number of years ago, where so I explained the number of rivets in an aircraft wing were consistent. I mean, every wing had the same number. And I got into understanding this because early in my career, I was painting tractors, and I had a older gentleman come up to me and just absolutely very politely tell me I had no idea what I was doing, because a certain pedal on a certain tractor was on the wrong side because he had run it. And I heard the whole story of how he had run a nail through his foot and he couldn't press on that pedal for like a month. And so that he's like, you know, and then he started explaining the bolt holes in the tractor frame and where each implement hooked up to them. And if my bolt holes were wrong, I had farmers explaining to me there should have been one more or one less, or they weren't right.
So that scarred you into like...
It scarred me into count the rivets in the plane wings, count the bolt holes in the tractor frames.
That's a lot of pressure, especially with some like your historical...
Yeah, so it's like, if you're going to paint a saddle, make sure it's an appropriate saddle and, you know, the appropriate boots. And I mean, it's just...
Well, I love that, because and what an interesting thing to be thinking about when you're looking at your work. I mean, and how it keeps you honest and makes, you know, you're doing a lot of preparation and work and research. There's a lot of that goes into creating work like this?
To research a World War II aircraft painting, I would spend up to 3 months.
Oh my goodness.
Getting all, and just stacks of notes and close-ups of certain bits and pieces, and then putting that all together, over the course of probably 150 hours.
Wow.
Is what it used to be. And so this is actually much looser than my style has been for years.
Do you want to talk about this painting a little bit?
Photos for this, the reference photos, there's no single photo, was done from the Kansas Western Reenactor Show. And I called this one Sadie Hawkins because the three gentlemen were actually up on the balcony and everybody was having a blast, having a lot of fun. And the ladies all came and gathered around. And the first thing I could think of was the Sadie Hawkins Day dances they had in high school.
Yes.
Where the girls asked
the guys, yeah.
Yes. Oh, to me, the West was more than the men. To me, the West was, the women helped build it. It was everybody, and so that was where this one was inspired by.
So let's go back a little bit. So did I read somewhere that you're self-taught?
Yes.
Okay, so when did your art story begin?
My art story started when I was 16, and we were cutting wood for the house. And so I had asked somebody to cut little slabs of wood. And I started painting little barn scenes on just the little round, the bark still on them. And one thing led to another. And I had a little gallery in Marshalltown that wanted some, so I would paint them, and I sent them to the gallery.
And how old were you?
16.
Okay.
And lo and behold, somebody bought them, and then, because let me back up, started doing bigger ones. So I ended up, and that turned around to saw blades, the infamous painted saw blades. And so somebody bought one that actually had dinner with Governor, I think it was Governor Ray. And the next thing I know, I'm getting an invite as I think it was 17-year-old to some governor's invitational art show.
Oh, cool.
And that kind of sort of started, because with all that, I started getting more and more requests. And the next thing I know, I'm a 17-year-old artist, and I'm buying my own clothes, and I'm paying for all my own stuff with these little wooden paintings I'm doing, and saw blades, and people would send me the great big 2-man saws. And so out there in barn doors, that was a huge one.
Yeah.
People would bring barn doors. And so that's what I did for all of my high school, 2 years of my high school career.
You got the bug.
Yeah.
And you've been painting ever since.
Yeah, I was making more money than anybody working.
And so you are a working artist.
Yes, right.
Has this been your main profession for?
It was for up until, because I spent 6 years I was a continuing education credit for colleges and schools. They would call me up, and I would go hold a 2 or 3 day workshop for teachers, art professors, and I'd hold a 2 or 3 day oil workshop. And so, I got paid anywhere from $300 to $500 to go do this. And the art teachers would get their education credits. And I did that for 6 years. And then that was along a lot of different lines I was doing. I mean, as far as art went, because I've taught continuing education classes. I used to go to schools and teach some classes.
He may be teaching some classes here at the Art Center in Burlington.
I'd be happy to.
I'm working on that right now.
And I ended up taking several years off just because I had reached a point where it was too much.
Well, it's like any other profession, you do get that burnout, I would imagine.
I was, and I got invites from all over the globe. I had somebody call me on right after 9/11. Mm-hmm. So real quick, I'll give you this story. I'm at a show in South Dakota, and lady comes in and she's like, "Hey, I'm from here. I interview you for the paper." I said, "Okay, fine." So I did an interview with her. Well, she ends up, I did not know this, but she was from, my best recollection, a magazine out east. And the next couple weeks later, after 9/11, my phone rings and it's her. And she goes, I talked to you here and here. I'm like, yeah, fine. She goes, I'd like to interview you for this article I'm doing. I said, okay, great. So did a half-hour interview on the phone, hung up, everything's cool. Next thing I know, I'm getting a copy of this article that is 5 people interviewed. One of them was a National Geographic photographer. One was a Nobel Poet Laureate.
Yeah.
I don't remember who the other 2 was. And me. All on the effects of 9/11 on the art community.
Huh.
And it must have had some global outreach, because right after that, I was getting invites from Kyoto and Rome and Spain to all these art shows, and I'm like, oh, great. I get to tour the world with my art. Till you find out in 1990s, it's $4,000 to box up and ship and then ship back.
So often people don't think about all the costs that an artist absorbs to show their work. You mentioned you make all of your frames.
Most of these, I went to them because I wanted, for the Western, I didn't want store-bought. I wanted the old, because 1800s, nobody went out and went, I'll take that frame.
Right.
It looks great. No, it's not how it worked. You made one. And so that's what I was trying to do, is stay with the character of the painting and the theme. And these are all cherry. This is such an amazing time for artists, because real quick, when I started, it was still a portfolio sent out to anybody with slides, and you had the little folder, the little binder, and in it went.
You send your little gallery packet off into the world and hope somebody opens it.
And it cost you $20 to put every one of them together, and you sent them off, and you hope somebody's. Yeah, you're right. You looked at it, and back when gallery reviews was put all the slides into the slots and sit around a table and project it on a wall. That's how galleries looked at your work.
Yeah.
And so it has gotten so much easier to be seen as an artist than it was. And the reach is so vast from.
Do you think that makes it challenging though too? Because everyone has such an amplified.
I'll see the line that I like to give everybody, which is, it's kind of from The Incredibles. When everybody's super, no one will be.
Yeah. It's
the same way with art now. Everybody's good. There is no great anymore. That's the biggest problem. You can have people out there and be, oh, but this person's great and that person. Yes, but if you wait 5 minutes, somebody on your For You page is going to come up that's just as good. And it's not taking anything away from anybody. It's just when I started, it was legwork. It was sending stuff out. It was shaking hands. You had to physically, and it became, as you had a smaller circle, because it was how far can you reach?
Right.
Now social media allows you to reach the world. People all around the globe can look at your work. And so it's a lot easier, but it's also a lot harder, because when I was doing it, how many artists are in my area?
Right.
This is who we're competing with for space.
Right.
Now it's global.
So what advice would you have for young artists? You talk about this collection in particular, it sounds like you hit like that wall where you were having a hard time getting inspiration. So what would your advice be to young people that maybe, or any creative person that kind of hits that wall, but also from a larger scope, now that you're looking at your career from a bird's eye view to some extent, what advice would you give to them, being from a world where things were done a little bit differently, but also being very much involved in today's art world and how to be an artist today? What advice would you give to that young person that's looking to pursue a career in the arts and wanting to make that their full-time living? So
like right now, I do digital graphics a lot. I do some stuff for different companies. It's don't get so stuck in your niche. That is the biggest. I see. So I can walk into a gallery or a museum and I can look at a piece and I can tell you on first sight whether that person is passionate about what they're doing or whether they're just simply following the formula and painting it because I'm good at painting this subject or that subject, so I paint it. It just, there goes, I'm excited about my work. It's great. It's amazing. And then, okay, now I've been doing this for 5 years. And you can see the slope of the work. And
so maybe be open to evolving. Like you've talked about, you've evolved. This was totally a new subject matter for you, or you started doing acrylics and you've done watercolors. This show is acrylic, oil, and watercolor. So maybe always branching out and allowing yourself to explore and
everybody gets stuck.
Change.
When you get stuck, switch mediums, switch subjects. I mean, just because take 3 months, for instance. If you're working in oils and you're kind of drugged down, or you're working in acrylics and you're like, oh, I'm losing inspiration. Pick up the watercolors, pick up colored pencils. I do oil pastels. I've worked in all the mediums because I needed that month or 2 or longer away from whatever I was doing. And then when I come back, then it's just this like new flood of ideas. And it's, wow, it feels new to me.
Do you think part of that is maybe like you feel like maybe you've mastered something or you're not being challenged enough? And maybe if you go to a different medium, maybe you feel like you're kind of wobbling along and, it's forcing you to refocus and it's forcing you to struggle a little bit. And maybe in that, it's where your inspiration comes.
There's something to be said for rejection. There's something when you get the letter going, sorry, you didn't make it. Like, oh, now I got to try. I got to try harder. I got to do something different.
Right. It's like, so my daughter is started to take piano lessons, and she loves practicing the things that she's really good at. And now that I am a mom and I'm having a daughter that has to sit down and practice piano every day, I can hear my own mother reminding me, don't practice the things that you're good at, don't practice over and over the things that you're good at. You got to sit and practice the things that you're not so good at, or you've got to work on the things that you're not the expert in or that don't come easily to you, because how will you get better and how will you grow if you're not constantly trying to
I have a friend in Minnesota who was doing watercolors, and I just was watching what he was doing with them, and I went, I think I'm going to do that. So I went and I bought watercolors, and the first few pieces were no good, and I'm like, all right, I'm figuring this out. And a lot of the watercolors now are in the show that I did, and it's just that's part of me. Is it, like you said, it doesn't do me any good to do the stuff I'm good at.
Right. Well, and I think it's a good conversation, especially to have with young people, because I think that there's this misconception that artists are just woke up good at something one day. Like you just woke up one day and you could paint or you could draw. And that's not at all the case, nor would you want people to think that. You're good at the things that you put hours and hours and hours and hours of time in, and that you failed and failed and failed at. And doesn't that make it something that you can appreciate even more, is to know, okay, if I want to do well at something, then I got to devote myself to it. And I think it's an interesting conversation, because I think so much of our world makes you assume that somebody just was naturally gifted at something and it just came to them so naturally. You hear that a lot with, people think musicians. No, I mean, they practice and they practice and they practice and they practice and they mess up. And I think that is something that, if you're okay to take those opportunities where there's a good chance you might not do so hot, then it's probably going to serve you well in the long run, more than always taking the easy.
Oh yeah, no, I had those years where I'd enter, 12, 14 shows and get one acceptance, and that's brutal, because that's what makes you go, oh, what am I doing wrong?
Maybe there's something a little thrilling in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's what pushes you.
But I bet it never gets old as an artist to see how people engage with your work and where their eye goes first and what they're initially drawn to. I bet that never gets
You want to hear
old.
my greatest moment?
Yes.
I did a show at Terry Redland's exhibit in Watertown, South Dakota. And I had this lady walk up to this very large aviation piece, World War II aviation piece. And it's done from above the aircraft looking down toward the ground. And this might sound bad, but she walked up to it, her and her friend, and the next thing I know, her friend is catching her. She's heading to the floor. I'm like, oh God, are you okay?
Did she faint?
Close. We got her sat down. She took a deep breath and she looks at me and she goes, oh, I can't look at that. She goes, I have terrible vertigo. And I was like, yes.
That was the goal.
That right there. But it's the reaction.
Yeah.
It's just simple, a flat painting.
Yeah.
But this lady with vertigo, it made her physically ill. And again, sounds really bad, but
she had a reaction.
She
had something about it.
Yes.
Affected her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same way with the World War II stuff I used to do. I would do a painting from a pilot story, and you'd watch this 70-something, 80-year-old man stand in front of your painting and cry. Mm-hmm. And there you go. Yeah. That's it. Kind of along, I see a lot of people, again, Billy the Kid has gotten its share of rude comments and people that don't care much for it. So if everybody wants to see that, come see what it's all about. But I always tell artists, because you get a lot of people going, oh, well, people hated this piece. They hated this piece. It's a reaction. You interacted with somebody. You got some emotion out of them. Yep. Good or bad.
Well, I heard somewhere a while ago, I read this or heard this somewhere, that it's not art's job to form consensus.
Yes.
It's not on the art or the artist to make you agree or disagree with something. Mm-hmm. It's there to make you think. And sometimes you might disagree. Sometimes you might love things. Sometimes you might hate it for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And isn't that powerful that it has the ability to make us think and stir up a reaction or an emotion, no matter what that might be?
That's where I kind of have objections to people wanting pieces pulled from any exhibit. You can complain about it all you want. You do not have the right to ask an artist piece to be pulled from any exhibit. React to it, have a fit, love it, don't love it, but it's there for everybody to pose an opinion on.
Yep.
And
it's okay to be confronted with things that make you uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah.
That's okay.
It is.
And I think if anything, you can always take away an opportunity to make yourself ask, well, what do I really think about that? And isn't that an awesome opportunity that we don't always get, or we're not always confronted with all the time, is, well, what do I really think about that? Yeah, I really disagree with that, or I really don't like that. Okay, well, at least you had a moment to really think about that and why. Or maybe it makes you do a little bit more research, or maybe it makes you have a little bit more empathy for people that maybe don't think like you do, or a little bit more empathy from about that artist and what they were trying to say, and maybe the context that they were in within that. So I think that that's another fascinating conversation, and I think that that's something that I love so much about art and getting to be around artists, is because you're always being confronted and asked to think about things that you should think about sometimes.
I've always told people that there is the artist's voice. This is not my voice. This
right.
is.
You can convey yourself so much better
Yes.
through your artwork. Yeah.
Yeah. And if an artist wants to make an impact on anything, and as you know, there have been pieces throughout history that made an impact. Mm-hmm. I mean, that people to this day, 500, 600 years later, still point to and go, that was significant, or they recorded a moment in time. And, I always go back to that, and kind of an old adage I had years ago that an old friend of mine told me, he goes, that's an artist's job.
Right.
Because the first cave painting was an artist telling a story.
Right. They're cementing.
Yeah.
And it's also like a collective history and cementing it in our collective moment. And I do think that. I think that that's why I fell in love with art history, was because history itself took on such a more profound meaning when I was seeing it through the eyes of artists and their interpretation of it. And they were living in those moments. And this is how they chose to sometimes have to be super, super brave. I think it's also important, to ask, what would I do in that situation? Yeah. Would I be able to do that? Would I have the courage to do that?
But, hundreds of years later, that artists express themselves. Their opposition to something, their support of something. And yeah, it's just this amazing, which kind of gets me a little bit, kind of on the riled up side sometimes when I see people just yelling and screaming about something. And it's like, I can paint a picture expressing my viewpoints and my opinions, and I can get hundreds of people to see it, where I can stand and scream on a corner all day and nobody hears me. I'm completely ignored.
That's why the world will always need artists.
It will.
The world will always need and benefit from artists in so many different forms. I could talk to you forever. No, thank you so much. Please come see this show. It will be going up shortly. It will be on exhibit here at the Art Center from January 7th to the 30th. And Tracy's opening will be Friday, January 17th from 5 to 8. And you're going to do an artist lecture. So any questions that I didn't get a chance to ask, please come. He will be there to answer them, and it will be a great night. And please, you do not want to miss this incredible show. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Perfect.